Are you firing this up? Cool. So, how did a Jewish exile become a Persian queen? So, we all know who we're talking about then. Queen Esther. Anybody know the memory verse? I saw your hand go up. Somebody want to read our memory verse? Very good. All right. As we think about our tour through biblical history, we've been studying the period of the return of the exiles from captivity. Last week we looked at Zerubbabel. What two things were restored in Jerusalem under the leadership of Zerubbabel? It says two. I think of three off the top of my head, but Zerubbabel. It sounds like you stutter when you say it. It's Zerubbabel. If you read Ezra this week, Ezra chapter 3 says he restored the daily sacrifices. Then, after about 20 years, he restores the temple. And in that time, they also restored the walls of the city of Jerusalem. The temple was completed in 515 BC, which is quite likely the same year that Esther was made queen, though there is two different groups on that. Today, we're going to continue looking at this period of time. We're going to begin by reading Esther chapter 2, so if you want to flip there. But I'll give you a gist of what leads up to these events. King Ahasuerus held a banquet where his queen, I think her name's Vashti, had refused to appear. Didn't come when she was called to the feast. In his anger about her refusal, he removes her as queen and starts to look for another one. So Esther chapter 2 is where we'll begin. I'll read the first 18 verses. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem at Susa, the citadel, under the custody of Haggai, the chief, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa the capital, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shami, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem along with the captives carried away with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken to the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. and he quickly provided her with cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best places in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go to the king Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulation for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil and myrrh, and 6 months with spice and ointment for women. When the young woman went into the king in his way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem of the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abilah, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go in with the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the woman, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all of his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So, how much time has passed between Vashti's banishment and the events in chapter 2? At least over a year, possibly several, because it starts with him remembering it, so that we don't know the length of time before he remembered and started looking. But they had 12 months of beautifying before they got to see him. So what is the plan to replace Queen Vashti? Gather up all the young virgins and let them pick. In what city did these events happen? Susa. It's one of the capitals of Persia. Who is Mordecai? Her uncle. Also the great-grandson of one of the exiles taken by King Nebuchadnezzar. Which leads to the next question. Who is Kish? He's the great-grandfather that was taken by Nebuchadnezzar. So how are Mordecai and Haddish related? Haddish is Esther's real name. Yeah. Cousins. How is Haddish described? Beautiful and lovely. So in what manner was she taken to the citadel? Voluntary, you think, or forced? I don't think they had much choice. It doesn't come right out and tell you that they just rounded them up and took them, but if the king says round them up, yeah. They didn't have much of a choice. Nope. So how does Hadash begin to be known as Esther? Ankur gave her that name. Why? To hide the fact that she was a Jew. At the palace, how was Esther treated? I liked her. Yeah, she was treated good. She found favor from Haggai, who gave her special treatment. No. What does verse 11 tell us about Mordecai? So what's that tell you about him? Concerned about her. What's it tell you about his job, his position? That he cared. Yep. Yep. In the kingdom. Joe Schmo can't walk into the concubines and see how people are doing. So he has to have a prominent position of power within the government to even be allowed to go in there, regardless of one of his relatives being there. So how long is Esther in the palace before she sees the king? 12 months. At least 12 months. What did Esther take when she appeared before the king? Yeah, it doesn't really tell us. It does give us an insight that Haggai liked her so much that he told her what to ask for that would put favorable sight in the king's eyes for her. But that's all it tells us. What phrase is repeated in verses 9, 15, and 17? One favor. Yep. Esther, one favor. In the eyes of the people, the palace, the king. How does the king respond? Loves her, chooses her as queen, right? Even throws a big feast in her honor. Chose her. Proverbs 21:1. I think we did this one last week too. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wills. So what does Proverbs 21:1 tell us about the king choosing Esther as queen? It was God's will. God causes all things or allows all things to happen. Nothing happens outside of his realm. Now we're going to skip over 2 points in the storyline. Esther chapter 2 tells how Mordecai uncovers a plot for the king to be killed. And he tells it, and the king hangs 2 men, and they record Mordecai's name in their chronicles, but he never gets his reward. That comes later. And then Esther 3, the beginning of it, tells of a man named Haman who rises to power in the king's court. Haman comes to hate Mordecai. Why? Because Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him. So he hatches this plot to eliminate Mordecai. And in doing so, eliminate all the Jews in the land by convincing the king to seal an order for the destruction of all the Jews in the Persian Empire. Yeah. He doesn't know right now that his queen, his new wife, is a Jew. But yeah, it does not go well. So let's read a long section, Esther 3:8 through 5:8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's law, so that it is not the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be declared that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasury. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict according to all that Haman commanded was written to the king's satraps and to the governors over all the provinces and all the officials of all the people, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by carriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children. In one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king commanded, and this decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting. And many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's young woman and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for the destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. And Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that they may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything Esther had ordered him. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to half of my kingdom." And Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine at their feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even if it is half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." Then Esther answered, "My wish and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to a feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." So how does Haman convince the king to allow the destruction of Jews? Offers them a bribe. What else? Which plays to his pride, right? You know, I'm king, they're not listening. Plays to his pride, offers them money. Did the king know what group of people Haman had in mind? No. But before the final decree went out, I am pretty positive he knew. Even though he gave him the signet ring, he's not reading that letter before it goes. He's a little pride and arrogant. He's going to see what goes out, especially with his signet on it. That's just my thoughts. So he didn't know at first, but I'm sure before everything got mailed, I know I would want to see what was written. Huh. He seems to be a fairly intelligent person and very prideful person. And if something's going out in your name, you want to make sure it ain't going to hurt your pride. How does the decree spread? I mean, they write it in every language and send it to every village, every city. What's Mordecai do when he finds out about it? Hmm? Yep. What about the rest of the Jews? What's it say about them? Yeah, great mourning. Fasted, mourned, sackcloth, ash. Pretty much the same thing. So what does Mordecai ask Esther to do? Go to the king and plead. Why does that terrify her? That's a death sentence. Nobody could. Not even just women. His top advisor couldn't walk into the throne room without being invited. It was an instant death sentence unless the king held up the scepter and allowed it after they stepped in, which was rare. More than likely, they're gone. We'll replace them. Yeah, so she was terrified of it. And on her next 30-day calendar that the king gave her, she didn't have one visit with him. So she had no idea how she was going to do it and live. How does Mordecai respond to her concerns? Yeah, she was going to be killed too. Her position won't save her. Why not? I mean, can't the king just say, not her? He didn't, but he couldn't stop it. Even as king, he did not have power to stop it once it's signed. Any law they put in place, it's not like today where you could just, the next president comes in and undoes that law, and it's gone. That law does not go away. No king can retract it. No king can take it away. Remember Daniel. We got thrown into the fire or the lion's den. Same thing. The king was tricked into writing something he shouldn't have, and Daniel winds up lion's den, and he's upset and fast and prays all night, try to figure out how to save Daniel, and there's no way he can do it. The king here would be in the same predicament. Once they find out she's a Jew, there was nothing he could do to save her because the decree is unending. Luckily, this one has an expression day. You know, if they didn't find out before the 13th day or whatever, the month of Adar, she'd be fine. But her position wouldn't save her, even as queen. How did Mordecai demonstrate his faith in God in his reply? Yeah. God will still save his people even if you don't. Yeah, but if you don't, and then that phrase that I love so much, you are put here for a time such as this. I mean, that's everybody in every generation. You're here for whatever time you're in. Esther's no different. We're no different. So how does Esther demonstrate her reliance on God as she prepares to approach the king? Yeah. Fast and pray. Though it doesn't mention prayer, the two go hand in hand. It's assumed in here. I was going to say it, but since you beat me to it. No, you're good. It's assumed the two are always together. Where there's fasting, there's prayer. So what happens when Esther appears in the king's court? Or again, she finds favor. She finds the king's favor. And what she asked for? You think she just come right out and ask for something to save the Jews? Yep, come to a banquet. After that banquet, she invites him to another banquet. The rest of chapter 5 describes Haman leaving the palace with joy, being filled with wrath upon seeking Mordecai. As a result, he goes home. Giddy. He can't wait. So he actually builds a gallows in front of his house because that's where he wants to kill Mordecai, right in front of his house. So he takes the time and the money and builds himself this big gallows in front of his house to witness it. Chapter 6 tells us the following day there's a twist delivered to Haman. The king remembers the plot of the people trying to kill him. And he can't sleep at night, if I remember the story right, and he has them read the old history, and they come to that story, and he's like, was Mordecai ever given reward for this? And he wasn't. So Mordecai had never been rewarded for protecting the king, and it was just so happened that the king remembered Mordecai's service during the night before. The king asked Haman what should be done to reward, I love that. So he asked Haman, what should be done to reward a man who served his king? Haman thinks he's talking about him. he thinks he's about to get this big reward from the king. Haman suggests a reward, and then he's told to carry out that reward, but not for him, carry out that reward for Mordecai. So Haman goes and he fulfills the command, but was absolutely ashamed. So his like for Mordecai does not get any better. Then he gets called to the second banquet with Esther and the king. And that's Esther chapter 7. We'll start in verse 1 and go through chapter 8, verse 12. So the king and Haman went into the feast with Queen Esther. And on the second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said to Esther, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it should be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent. But our affliction is not to be compared with the loss to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he? Who has dared to do this thing?" And Esther said, "A foe, an enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. And the king arose, and in his wrath from the wine drinking, and went into the palace garden. But Haman stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther. For he saw that harm was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place where they were drinking wine, as Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen in my presence in my house?" As the words left the mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Aborna, one of the eunuchs in attendance of the king, said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman had prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high." The king said, "Hang him on that." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the wrath of the king abated. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which had been taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet and wept, and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman the Agagite and the plot that had devised against the Jews. When the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. And she said, "If it please the king, and if I found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in thy eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which has wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the province of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then the king Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. But you may write as you please with regards to the Jew, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." The king's scribes were summoned at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews. So the satraps and the governors and the officials of the province, from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. And he wrote in the name of the king Ahasuerus, and sealed it with the king's signet. Then he sent the letters by mounted courier riders on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud, saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in the city to gather and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. And one day throughout all the province of King Ashur, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. So how does the king react to Esther telling Esther's explanation and petition? He immediately wants to know who hatched a plot, right? Who did this thing? Yeah. How does he react? And a little drunk too, yep. How does he react when he finds out it is Haman? Yeah, he gets mad. And how does Haman respond? Yeah, he starts to grovel and beg. The hunter becomes the hunted. It goes even worse, yep. And then what ironic twist becomes of the gallows that he builds? So he erected his own death. And then who takes his place on the council? Yeah, and over his household and all the money. Then what's Esther do? And begs for the edict to be revoked. It can't be revoked. The king says we can't take it back, but here, write your own. So what clever plan does Mordecai come up with to save the Jews? They can. They don't. But yeah, so he takes what Haman wrote and gives the Jews permission to do the same to anybody who attacks them. So, who is responsible for orchestrating all of the events? God. Who else is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther? God. He is not mentioned once in the book of Esther. Yes, it is hinted. It's in there. But it's not like every other book of the Bible that names him. Esther doesn't name him once. Yeah. Mordecai says it beautifully. Even if you don't do it, we'll be protected. Protected by who? By God. Questions? All right, you still have a little left in that you could do. That providential plan activity was pretty good if you have time this week.
This is a commentary on anti-Semitism.
If it did, nobody got it because it's still around. They miss it. Never goes well. But the world keeps trying. And that goes all the way back to those who, Abraham, right? Those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. They still try. All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we know that you are sovereign over all things, that you control the hearts of kings, guide them towards your will, that you place them there and that you remove them. We worry not about tomorrow because we serve the God who holds tomorrow in his hand. Father, help us keep that fresh in our minds as we go out to serve you, that you are in control of it all. In Jesus' name, amen.